news show. In this episode, we talk about car manufacturers pushing back against the government's proposal to increase the number of airbags in cars. We also talk about India winning its first world title in Judo. But first, we talk about the Supertech demolition. On Sunday, 2 high-rise buildings in Noida called Twin Towers that had been constructed by Supertech, a prominent builder in the area, were demolished on the orders of the Supreme Court. The buildings had been embroiled in a 9-year-long court battle and were demolished in a matter of 12 seconds. The entire operation took meticulous planning, coordination, and the use of some highly sophisticated explosives. In this segment, we speak to Indian Express's Malavika Prasad about the demolition and how it was carried out. So Malavika, these twin towers that were constructed by the prominent builder Supertech were part of Emerald Court, which is a group housing society in Noida. Could you begin by telling us more about these buildings?
So one of the buildings, the taller of the two, is called Apex. It had 32 floors. And the other one was called Cyan. It had around 29 floors. And at the time, there was supposed to be 915 flats in total with 21 shops and 2 full basements. The basements could house around 1,000 cars, maybe even more. I mean, we wouldn't know now, because I visited one of the other towers in the same complex and I saw that there were around 1,000 to 2,000 cars. And the other towers that were around the Emerald Court project, I guess each building had around 44 flats. So you can imagine the number of people that lived there. And if the 2 towers had been added, there would be even more. Around 5,000 people live already in Emerald Court. So the issue that arose is that there were certain building norms that had been violated by the builder. You have to keep in mind when you're constructing, there has to be very safe distance between 2 towers that are being constructed. And that was something which the builder had violated. So when I went inside the premises, Astor 2, which is one of the towers closest to the Twin Towers, there was only a distance of 9 meters. Now 9 meters is not safe by any chance. And that was the issue that was first Allahabad High Court, which they upheld. And then the matter went before the Supreme Court also. And this is what the Supreme Court also said. They said that building norms have been violated. And then eventually they ordered a demolition of the 2 Twin Towers.
Right, and people had actually invested money in this building. Most of them have now got their money back, while some others are yet to receive it, and their cases are still ongoing. And meanwhile, you also write that FIRs have been filed against some 26 officials who are said to have been involved in this unsafe and illegal construction. But after the Supreme Court ordered that the buildings should be demolished, what steps were taken to make that possible, especially considering that these buildings were in a heavily populated area?
So to demolish a building of this sort of nature, this height, I mean, it is under the 100 meters club. It took a lot of time. Edifice Engineering is a company which specializes in demolishing buildings and concrete, were engaged by the Noida Authority. And they partnered with a South African-based company called Jet Demolition for constructing the blast plan and, demolishing the 2 towers. They had over 60 technical experts involved. Eventually, a building research body called the CBRI, which is the Central Building Research Institute from Roorkee, they were also involved because, you have to make sure that safety is of utmost importance. Like the demolition in case here, it happened in a very heavily populated residential area. So that safety issue was of primary concern. So the CBRI was involved and the CBRI asked both Supertech and Edifice Engineering to, help them out, send them all the reports, tell them the details of the blast plan, tell them the details of what is the condition of the towers that are closest to the 2 buildings, whether, they require any strengthening, whether the columns are okay, do they require to be, retrofitted, things like that. I mean, that is the reason why it took a lot of time. And there was responsibility divided between Edifice Engineering. Well, they are basically responsible for taking the buildings down. Supertech, the builder, was responsible for strengthening the columns of the buildings that are closest to the Twin Towers because they are the builder. So all of that took a lot of time. And there were a lot of reviews, lot of meetings. WA was also involved because, they had to be reassured again and again. And there are 2 societies which are closest to the Twin Towers. One is Emerald Court, where the towers stood. And the other is right behind the Twin Towers is ATS Village. Now, both the RWAs, which is the Resident Welfare Association, they were involved in all of these meetings and proceedings because, rightfully so, that their issue was that, look, safety has to be taken care of, right?
Yeah, because they're the ones you're trying to keep safe during the demolition.
Right. Especially for ATS Village. I mean, it's not even the same builder. They're just in the neighborhood. So, yeah, all those things had to be taken care of.
And could you talk a bit about the explosives that were used? Because they had to use them in a way that other buildings don't end up getting affected.
Correct. So I interviewed Mr. Utkarsh Mehta, who is the partner at Edifice Engineering, and I had specifically asked him about the explosives. What he tried to explain to me is that explosives in India are understood in a very different manner, because usually they are used in the mining industry. And therefore, that understanding is very different from, what we think of. But in this case, in the demolition of the Twin Towers, explosives called shock tube explosives were used, which resemble like a plastic tube. And the explosive material is in like a powder sort of form. And the manner in which they placed the explosives was that they drilled around 9,640 holes in the columns of both the towers, and they placed each of them in those holes and then connected them with wire and flow to flow. Then once that was done, another process called flow to flow connectivity of the explosives that have been placed was carried out, which went around for around 1.5 or 2 days, wherein you have to connect them through wires. So the idea is that the buildings don't fall on top of each other or on the road or on the building behind. The idea is that each floor sits on the other. So that is the only way you can ensure safety of the people that are living around or of the societies that are around the Twin Towers.
Right, and besides this, there was also an exclusion zone that was created before the demolition, and people who lived around the Supertech buildings were asked to evacuate their homes on the morning of the demolition and come back only after it was done. So talk about that aspect a bit.
So as part of the evacuation plan, the residents had been told to take away their vehicles also. They had been told to put bubble wrap or wrap their glass doors and stuff with paper or other material, or put plastic sheets around their balcony so that the debris that is there, it doesn't come inside their home. And Edifice Engineering had actually covered the towers that were closest to the Twin Towers in both ATS and Emerald Court with geotextile fabric. So if there is any flying debris or large chunks of cement or even dust for that matter, doesn't enter their homes. And residents had themselves taken a lot of precautions. Like I was mentioning, that they covered their balconies, they got their plants from the balconies inside, they took off their TVs from the wall, they took off any paintings or anything that was on the wall, and they had to switch off all their electrical appliances and the electricity in their house, and they had to obviously evacuate. Not only that, they had to take away their pets, and even stray animals were also removed. Noida Authority did say that they will remove the plants, and they did do that. Other than that, there were also certain volunteers from neighboring societies who kind of took it upon their own to remove these strays from that area, because everybody would be affected and no living being could be in that exclusion zone. Those were the instructions that were very, very clear.
Okay, so now we come to the day of the demolition, that is Sunday. We know that the traffic police was coordinating with the authorities, the nearby expressway was closed down for about 30 minutes, and there was also an incident command center that was set up nearby where Noida police was monitoring the entire situation. And you write that CCTV cameras had been installed inside the exclusion zone so that the authorities could see what was happening inside. And I mean, all this took months to plan, and some 3,700 kilograms of explosives were used. How long did it take for the buildings to come down?
Oh, it was literally a matter of seconds. We were all doing the countdowns in our head. And I think it was around maybe 9 to 12 seconds that the building came down. There was first a thunderous sound, and then we felt tremors at the flyover. And then we just saw the building kind of topple, the floors kind of topple on top of each other and slowly, well, it wasn't slow, it was kind of fast. It kind of came down, and then what was left behind was a large dust cloud, which seemed to come towards us, but it did dissipate in after some time.
And people who lived nearby and the ones who could see the buildings from a safe distance had actually gathered to see it all go down, and they were cheering and clapping when that happened. But you also mentioned the enormous dust storm that emerged right after the demolition. What did the authorities do about that?
So, Noida Authority had created a dust management plan. All this was in place already. So, they had deployed around 50 to 100 water tankers to clean off the dust. They had deployed what are called anti-smoke guns that were on immediately after the demolition happened to sort of counter the dust so that the dust does not settle on like the road, the footpaths, even the trees. There were plans made to, clean the trees and the plants in the area on which the dust would settle. And they had deployed mechanical sweeping machines as well as sanitation staff from the authority. So that was immediate.
Yeah, the good thing is that almost everything went according to plan. Now, post the demolition, authorities say that some 80,000 tons of construction and demolition waste has accumulated at the site. Do we know how that will be taken care of?
So, like I mentioned before, the towers are like really tall. Apex and Sian, they are in the 100-meter club. So, obviously, a lot of debris would be generated. And the plan as of now, which is called the debris management or the CND waste demolition plan, which is construction and demolition waste, is that whatever debris, the majority of the debris that is generated will be used to fill up the basements. So that, tomorrow, if whatever that land is used for something else, like people don't fall into it. So the basement would first be covered up. And then the debris that is around the basement, and they'll inspect it to see if it is completely covered up. And then the debris that is around the basement, which would, consist of like steel and like large chunks of cement, mortar, whatever, that would be then taken to a waste processing plant and scientifically disposed of. That is a plan for debris management as of now.
And Malvika, you have been speaking to people in the area about what they thought of the demolition. Could you share what they have told you?
See, honestly, covering this demolition, all the residents that were at Emerald Court, they were very happy about it. They kept saying that it's a good thing that's happening. It should have happened a long time ago. And that it gives a very strong signal to corrupt people that, they can't just take things for granted, specifically for real estate builders. That's a sentiment that is very common. So anxiety was there that, okay, what will happen to our homes? Will it get damaged? Stuff like that. But more or less, at least the residents that I met, they were happy. They were like, okay, good. Something good is happening.
And next we talk about car safety. Right now it is mandatory for cars in India to have 2 airbags. One for the driver and one for the passenger in front. And airbags are important because they keep you from colliding with the steering wheel, dashboard and other car parts in case of an accident. This rule came into effect this January. But earlier this year, the government also announced that vehicles that carry up to 8 passengers should have a minimum of 6 airbags. 4 for the driver and passenger in front, and 2 for passengers sitting behind. These will include airbags on the side of the car as well, and not just the front. But the government's plan to mandate this rule is seeing a pushback from car companies. For example, Maruti Suzuki, which makes nearly 1 out of the 2 cars sold in India, has been asking the government to reconsider the proposal, saying that it will significantly increase the price of small budget cars and impact its sales, especially considering the fact that car sales have taken a big hit since COVID. But the thing is that airbags do make cars safer and are a must in a country like India that witnesses a lot of road traffic accidents. In this segment, we speak to Indian Express's Udit Mishra about this issue and what experts say should be the way forward. Udit, could you begin by talking about how big a problem road accidents are in India?
So it's a massive one. We were looking at the data globally, and India is one of those countries which is not only at a high level, which is to say that we lose somewhere around 150,000 people due to road accidents. And as the Minister for Road Transport has also alerted that 60% of these deaths are among the youth. It's between 18 to 24 years of age group. So it's a massive concern for us, the road accidents and the casualties that happen as a result of that. And what is worse, as I said, is that it's not only that it's at a high level, but this is a graph which is continuing to go up every passing year. So unlike many other countries that we tend to compare ourselves with, this graph is on an upward trajectory. So things are not improving, they're just worsening with every passing year.
Right, and even though airbags are an important safety feature, car companies are pushing back on it. And from the perspective of car manufacturers, they say that this will significantly increase the price of small budget cars. In an article that was published in the Indian Express, we mentioned that a frontal airbag in an entry level car costs between 5,000 and 10,000 rupees, and side and curtain airbags could cost more than double that amount, which I suppose is a big amount for cars that cost between 3 to 7 lakh. So considering this, how should we see this pushback from car manufacturers?
So the first thing to understand is that when we talk about airbags, it's not just in isolation. When we talk about using airbags in certain cars, say the entry level cars, these cars will then need to be restructured because just plonking some airbags is not going to be necessarily effective. You need to have a structure. So if you're aiming to make it a 4-star or a 5-star rating in NCAP testing, that kind of a car, then you need holistic change. You have to reorder the car altogether. And that bumps up the prices. You can do some cosmetic changes also like plonking some airbags, but even that would have a significant enough cost. And this is important because India is a very price sensitive market. When we say price sensitive, it basically is a euphemism that for a lot of Indians, buying a 3 lakh or a 4 lakh rupee car is a big deal. And most of them are the entry level buyers who are graduating from a two-wheeler or from roaming around in a bus or walking on foot. So there are 2-3 ways to look at it. One is obviously that from the car manufacturers, it's a more holistic thing than just plonking a few airbags, and it is likely the cost will snowball and they're likely to suffer. It takes away from them the freedom to give choice to consumers if somebody doesn't want certain things. From consumers' perspective, it can put cars out of reach for a lot of consumers. And you have to also understand that for a lot of consumers, first-time buyers, they are not being irrational when they are perhaps choosing a car even without airbags, because you have to see their initial position. If they are graduating from a scooter, they are getting more safety at least in a manner of speaking. So it's not an irrational decision for them, but adding another 15, 20,000 or 50,000 of cost may just put it beyond them.
And one thing that I suppose seems unfair is that such important safety features can mainly be availed by people who can buy high-end cars. Because in those cars, these features are available. But because of price sensitivity issues, car manufacturers are reluctant to put them in, and buyers are also reluctant to pay a bit more for those features. But having said that, we do require these features, among other things, to reduce accident-related deaths. So what do experts say should be the road going forward, considering this situation?
So there is obviously a hard budget constraint for a lot of Indians, and that sort of applies also for the economy. And I suppose one could argue that as the economy finds itself in a better position, per capita incomes rise, this choice, very perverse choice of having to choose a car which is perhaps not the highest on safety standards would perhaps get reduced for most people. However, when I was going through the literature, this notion that a lot of people have, even I had before writing the story, that it's solely a matter of per capita incomes that will determine how accessible or how many road accidents happen is questionable. A lot of people do say that if you enforce good laws, fairly enforced and regularly enforced, then you can bring down the road accidents. So quality of roads, the signage that you have, whether you have made people aware of the risks involved and rules and regulations, drivers knowing how to drive and roads being made properly, all of that. And then also looking at institutional framework. Often these things happen in a very ad hoc manner, government intervening one day and then going back another day, wanting one thing or another. The idea is when we were looking at even places like in Argentina, which is not necessarily the developed country like US, they have put in place after very bad accidents and horrific crashes, they have put in place an institutional framework which is centralized at a national level, not sort of driven by state agendas, and has the financial muscle to incentivize behavior and to incentivize better availability of, say, road infrastructure and an enforcement infrastructure. So I think we need to look at it more holistically and not just blame Indians per se for being irrational or just wait necessarily for a time when we become richer.
And Udit, car companies, when talking about these safety features, basically say that they will have to pass on the cost to the customers. Now, some say that since it is their product, they should bear a part of that cost and responsibility to put these features in, especially when in other places like Europe, global car manufacturers are already being asked to do so. So is that a fair argument?
So in most places around the world, regulation has stepped in. And frankly, car manufacturers would be no different, I believe, than any other businessman or business firm which is trying to maximize its profits. So if it can sell cars which are cheaper, more accessible, even though less safe, they'd perhaps go ahead and do that, because ultimately the agency is with the consumer. They are buying it knowing fully well. So that is where awareness and all of these things come into focus, whether you know what your rights are and what the risks are in driving something or buying a product. But I don't think that without proper regulatory environment, we could genuinely expect car manufacturers per se, who are profit-seeking businessmen and firms, actually making a change all by themselves.
And in the end, we talk about India's first world title in Judo. Last week, Linthoi Chanambam, the 16-year-old judo player from Manipur, became the first Indian to win a world title in the martial arts competition. Chanabam defeated Brazil's Reis Bianca in the World Cadet Championships in Sarajevo. In this segment, Indian Express's Nitin Sharma joins us to talk about Chanabam's win. Nitin, could you begin by talking a bit about Chanabam and what led to her becoming a judo player?
Yeah, Linthoi Chanambam, she's a 16-year-old youngster, and I would say, as I conversed with her, a very confident kid. And she comes from a village, Mayang, near Imphal in Manipur. It's the same village from where 2018 Youth Olympics silver medalist Tababi Devi belongs to. And she's the middle child among her three siblings of a fish pond farmer, and her mother also works as a homemaker as well as stitches clothes at her home. So like other kids, she started football, boxing initially, but there were 2-3 judo academies at the village. And as she told me, she was always raised up like a boy by her parents. So she roamed with the village boys who played judo, and she often, had even fights with them. And then she would injure some boys, and her parents had to take the boys to the hospital also, she would tell me. So that's how her initiation into judo began, and at the local academy in the village where Tababi Devi also trained. There were 2 coaches, and that's how her journey in judo started at the village.
And now you write that her training leading up to this title happened after she got stuck in Georgia during the first COVID lockdown. She had gone to Georgia to train for some months, but ended up being stuck there for a lot longer, and that it actually helped her. So talk about what happened there.
Yeah, as part of her training, she had gone to Georgia for a month or 2 to train in March 2020. And when the whole world was fighting with the pandemic, and it meant that all the flights and all, they got cancelled. And there she was stuck with the Georgian coach, Mamuka Kishilashvi. And he took her to the town of Akhmeta, his native town. It's in eastern Georgia. And surprisingly, the town is native also to 2 former Olympic judo champions. And there she stayed with the coach's family, extended family of 30 odd members, and coach had a son and a daughter, almost 10 years old and 5-year-old. And there she trained for close to 9 months. It's a town of having a population of more than 8,000, but most of the kids or most of the national campers also come to the region to train. So there every day she practiced for 2 practice sessions in the morning as well as in the evening with the top rated judokas of the country, as well as former world junior champion Eteri Lipertialiani, who finished 5th in the Tokyo Olympics. So as a kid, she benefited from that. And if a kid like her can spend more than 9 months at a foreign village training under the coach, I guess then she can achieve anything in the world.
Yeah, because you write that staying away from her family, during the lockdown also took quite a toll on her. So talk about how the family has now reacted to her win.
Yeah, like surprisingly, her father, her younger sister, she is also a judoka. And on the day she won, her father had gone to Guwahati, accompanying her younger sister who is competing in a Khelo India Judo League. So there he celebrated it, watched final bout along with the other judokas at Guwahati, while her mother and the coaches also, like her coaches at one of the academies, Angam, Surjit Metai, they were also watching the bout. And the next day they celebrated it at their home.
And so what is next for Chanabam? What challenges is she expected to face going forward?
So one of the main challenges which Indian judokas face, like even the Olympian Avtar Singh, they don't get much opportunity to compete in the foreign leagues or foreign competitions. Like most of the European judokas, they compete in about 80 to 90 competitions. And while the Indians, they get to compete in 5 to 6 competitions. Competing in more tournaments is vital for earning ranking points for Olympics as well as gaining experience. Like Linthoi is 16-year-old, but if she has to aim to win a medal, perhaps in Paris or in 2028 Olympics, she would need to compete, at least 30-40 competitions in Europe or across the world to get a shot at the Olympic medal. So I guess with more competition and the transition from the cadet level to the junior to the senior, it needs to be about getting her more exposure to gain more experience.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.